Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the May Public Works Committee meeting. I am Public Works Chair Barbara Burke, and joining me on committee today are the Vice Chair, Councilmember Scott Andrew Bowen, Councilmember Robert Clark, and Councilmember James Taylor. Our agenda is made up of two parts, the consent agenda and the general agenda, and it is the practice of the council to act on the consent agenda with one motion. Council members, we have one consent agenda item. Would anyone like to pull that one item?
Madam Chair, if there's nothing further, I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second successfully, so we'll move on. Let's vote. All in favor of approving the item?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, a successful motion and it passes. At this time, I'll call on our city clerk to read general agenda item number 1.
Item G1, consideration of items related to North Carolina Department of Transportation agreement for additional funding and time extension of Piedmont Regional Greenway construction.
Thank you so much. So we have, Mr. King, can you tee this up for us?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. So Charles Hendrick is our engineering finance manager. He's going to talk to you a little bit about Piedmont Regional Greenway and what we're doing with this item. So I'll turn it over to Charles.
Thank you.
Chairman Berg, members of committee and council, the item before you is a supplemental agreement for additional time and additional funding and part of this agreement is for the Piedmont Regional Greenway. This section of Greenway is a 6,500 linear feet, 10-foot wide path that extends the Salem Lake Trail there at Limble Road up to Hastings Hill Road there at East Forsyth High School. This Piedmont Regional Greenway is part of a larger planned greenway that's about 19 miles that would go from Linville Road all the way out to Summerfield. Several communities are involved: Oak Ridge, Summerfield, Kernersville, also Winston-Salem and Greensboro. It would extend, in the future, it will extend trails to those different municipalities.
Thank you. Council members, are there any questions? Councilmember Scipio?
This trail, does it connect to the Salem Lake Trail that goes from Marketplace out to Salem Lake, and therefore people would be able to go from Marketplace on Peters Creek all the way to Summerfield?
Yes, ma'am. In the future, that's the intent, that it's going to go that far. Right now, we're at least going to get the trail up to Hastings Hill Road. But yes, it does start right there at the near the parking lot there at Linville Road.
Councilmember Bowen?
Thank you, Chair. So there was original estimated price for this project, and I saw that there is an increase in the total cost, and it says that it's going to be estimated time to finish it is around 2028. Is that still correct?
Yes, sir. We are planning to let this for construction at the end of 2026, so probably in the fourth quarter of 2026. So it'll be under construction and will be completed before that end of performance, which is September 30th of 2028.
And are we still in, this is a comfortable price increase for us? That could then continue on for the next 3 years?
Once, we are still trying to finish the design phase. We're approximately at 65% of design. We have a consultant that we've selected to finish that out. Once the agreement with that consultant has been signed, the consultant will come on board. Once the design is complete, then we'll run new estimates based on current numbers. So definitely from the original estimate, you see a inflationary cost to it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions, council members? Well, thank you, Mr. Hendrick. Is there a motion for approving item G1?
I move for approval of item G1.
I'll second that.
Okay, we're ready for a vote. All in favor of approving item G1, please say
Aye.
aye.
We're gonna
Or
vote.
we can vote on our tablet. And that vote passes. It's unanimous. We're ready. Madam Clerk, would you please read agenda item G2?
Item G2, update on the Winston-Salem Area Transportation Planning Organization.
Mr. King, can you tee this one up?
Sure, thank you, Chair Burke. So this is just an information item. In talking with Jeff, we felt like it was a good opportunity with new council members coming on board to talk a little bit about what our Metropolitan Planning Organization that is housed in our city DOT, what the work that they do, to talk a little bit about long-range planning, how those federal funds come in through the organization, how the staff there works through that process, how that plays in with our Transportation Advisory Committee. So what we have for you with G2 is just a kind of an information item to just kind of talk a little bit about that. We haven't done that in a great deal at Public Works before, so we felt like it was a good time to maybe do a little bit of a refresher there. And with us today is Hunter Stazak, who's a transportation engineer with our city DOT. And so I will turn it over to Hunter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of City Council of Winston-Salem. Good to be
afternoon.
with you this afternoon. We are here to discuss the Transportation Planning Organization, and I've put together a few slides for you called Get to Know the Winston-Salem Area TPO, understanding that there are varying levels of understanding and engagement with the Transportation Planning Organization. This presentation is going to function as a get to know, but also for some of our members who have been part of our Transportation Advisory Committee and involved with the Transportation Planning Organization. Hopefully you'll learn some new things as part of this presentation too. So I like to start every presentation out with a roadmap of where I'm going. So this presentation will be no different. We'll provide 5 goals that we'll accomplish through this presentation. So we'll start by defining the Winston-Salem Area Transportation Planning Organization, what it is and its role in our community is, along with the membership structure. Second, we'll discuss what the role of the City of Winston-Salem and the Department of Transportation is within the Winston-Salem Area TPO. And then third, we'll talk about some key planning initiatives in the Winston-Salem Area TPO with specific attention to projects of interest in the City of Winston-Salem. We'll then talk about our funding mechanisms and the overall big picture funding update for our region. And then we'll close out by discussing some infrastructure projects that are going to be built right here in the City of Winston-Salem with the help of the TPO. We'll first start with a brief history lesson, and we'll go back to 1962 when the U.S. Congress enacted the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1962. Essentially, Congress stated with this law that if we're going to continue to fund federal transportation projects in our localities and our states, they need to have a plan. And our urbanized areas of 50,000 or more need to be the ones to spearhead that because the locals know best. So they established something called a Metropolitan Planning Organization across the country for areas with populations of 50,000 or greater. And our MPO, as it currently stands, has a population of about 440,000 people. And we stretch from City of Winston-Salem all the way up north to King, south to around Lexington, east to Kernersville, and west to Clemens and Bermuda Run. We were established in 1974, so that's more than 50 years of transportation planning in our region as it pertains to the federal mandate that we have. So we are a federally mandated and funded organization charged with making multimodal, meaning highway, rail, aviation, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit planning, policy, and funding decisions for the Winston-Salem urbanized area, which you can see on that slide represents good portions of Forsyth County, Stokes, Davie, and Davidson as well. To answer what the Winston-Salem Area Transportation Planning Organization really is, though, I think it would be helpful to talk about some of our core products and what we develop. We'll start by talking about the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, which, for lack of a better term, is something of a wish list, something that we would do if we had unlimited time, resources, financial, and otherwise. The Comprehensive Transportation Plan lays out a vision for bicycle and pedestrian, highway, rail, transit, and aviation improvements that we would like to see over a 20-plus year time frame in our area. We start to develop that by engaging with the public. We talk with our local elected officials. We place the best recommendations on a map, and then we try to find funding for those projects through the help of our board. We then apply through our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, some fiscal constraint to that comprehensive transportation plan. And the Metropolitan Transportation Plan provides a 25-year vision in our region. Current one we're working on will go out to 2050. And that essentially says, here's our comprehensive transportation plan, and let's apply some fiscal constraint to that based on what we forecast our revenues at the state and federal and local level are going to look like. So it's a much more narrowed down version of our comprehensive transportation plan, and it's based on the local priorities that we're told that the public, that our local elected officials, and others desire. From that point, in an ideal world, we then work to implement those projects after we've studied them a little bit longer, and we try to program them in our transportation improvement program. You may have heard this at the state level referred to as the State Transportation Improvement Program, and that is a 10-year financial and construction schedule for all of the transportation projects that receive state and federal funding in North Carolina that we plan to build over that 10-year period, or at least begin to develop. The other product that the MPO, or Transportation Planning Organization, is involved in is the Unified Planning Work Program. This is an annual program that essentially spells out what all of the transportation planning staff within the city of Winston-Salem are going to work on over the course of the next year, and how we're going to use our federal funds to accomplish those goals. Our membership is broken up this way: 12 municipalities, with the city of Winston-Salem having the most votes on our board, 4 counties, Forsyth, Stokes, Davie, and Davidson counties, 3 transit agencies, Winston-Salem Transit Authority, Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation, or PART, and the Davidson County Transportation System in Davidson County. We also represent and have the representation of 1 airport, the Smith Reynolds Airport, on our board, as well as the participation of the local North Carolina DOT Highway Division, Division 9. We're also overseen by federal partners at the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration to make sure that we're following all necessary federal regulations. We'll talk a little bit about how decision-making occurs in the TPO. We say that we make a lot of decisions around funding and adopting plans and so on. And that begins with staff expertise, which begins by making recommendations based on our local knowledge and public input that we've received. And then we refer that to a technical coordinating committee. The technical coordinating committee is made up of staff. These are often town or city managers or directors of transportation from each of our local municipalities that I showed you on that map just a slide ago. They will work on the staff recommendations or edit or modify them as they see fit, and then refer the final recommendation to the Transportation Advisory Committee, which is made up of elected officials just like you, who will then make the final decision to program funds and to adopt plans. So Aaron mentioned earlier, Assistant City Manager King mentioned that the Winston-Salem Department of Transportation is the lead planning agency for the Winston-Salem Area Transportation Planning Organization. That essentially means that we're responsible for carrying out the day-to-day tasks that are required of a federal transportation planning organization, or MPO. Winston-Salem Area TPO plans not just for the city, but we also plan for our surrounding region as well, and we're made up of several staff people. First is a TPO director, or in our case, an assistant director of transportation for Winston-Salem DOT, Kelly Garvin, who's in the room with us now. We have a principal planner, transportation engineer, transportation project planners, 1 for transit and 1 for bicycle and pedestrian projects, a transportation planner, an engineering technician, 2 transportation financial managers in the department who help support the work of the MPO, as well as a Title VI coordinator who also serves as our transit contract manager, and 2 transportation planning interns.
Yes, Councilmember Scipio.
Are all of these people on our DOT staff, or are some of them from other areas?
All of them are part of the Winston-Salem Department of Transportation and our City of Winston-Salem employees. Thank you. Now I think it would be helpful to talk about the Winston-Salem DOT and TPO's relationship in terms of our core planning initiatives and what we do. So we do a lot more than those core products that I mentioned. But the first function of a TPO, first and foremost, is of course to develop a long-range plan that is based on a 25-year vision. And so I do have to mention again that we are working on our 25-year vision out to the year 2050 for the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Comprehensive Transportation Plan. But we do more than just long-range transportation planning. We look into specific projects that we want to pursue in greater detail. We look at alternatives. Completed projects in the recent past include the Salem Creek Greenway feasibility study that looked at 2 different alignments along the Salem Creek Greenway and helped us develop a better sense of how much that project could cost, as an example. But current projects that we have on the horizon are the Northwest Boulevard study, which is a streetscaping study from University Parkway to Ivy Avenue in Winston-Salem. We've got our Salem Creek Low Water Bridge feasibility study, which will look at the area of recurrent flooding along the Salem Creek Greenway and look at the best ways to design and input a bridge so that people can have a more pleasant walking and biking experience along that trail. And we're also going to be partners in the City of Winston-Salem Safety Action Plan that was awarded through the Safe Streets for All program. The TPO also provides a really important role in setting goals and tracking performance measures. And one of the most important performance measures that a TPO is required to track is safety performance. And so every year we set 5-year goals for what the reduction in fatalities and injuries should look like on our roadways for both non-motorized and motorized users. We also set goals as it relates to congestion, and we recently adopted our 2024 Congestion Management Process Status of the Systems Report, which talks about how in some ways we are doing better when it comes to congestion relative to pre-COVID levels, and talks about how multimodal transportation, such as greater investments in transit and walkability, can provide meaningful alternatives and address congestion in other ways. Of course, the TPO, and perhaps the most foundational component of a TPO, is its role in transportation funding. One of the most important roles that the TPO plays is prioritization, and that is the development of the 10-year Transportation Improvement Program in the state of North Carolina. We also have a regional flexible funding program, which deals with a small subset of funding that is directly allocated to the MPO through the state of North Carolina. That is federal funding that we can apply to smaller localized projects. We have Section 5307 and 5310 funding allocations that can be used for transit providers. And we also provide competitive grant writing services, and some of our staff were involved in the writing of the RAISE grant application for the Long Branch Trail and the lower no emissions bus grant as well. We're of course always involved in public involvement, but one of the biggest updates that we're involved in right now is the update of our public participation policy as things have changed with the world of social media and how best to engage. So we're looking forward to releasing that update later this year. And finally, we are a regional organization. I mentioned that we span 4 counties, but not only do we do that, we work with neighboring MPOs. We're not really far from Greensboro. Greensboro has their own MPO, and we need to coordinate with them. Same goes for the High Point MPO. And so all 3 of those MPOs, plus Burlington Graham MPO, are involved in a regional modeling effort. And the big thing that you need to know about the transportation regional model is this. It forecasts what our population growth is going to look like in terms of job growth and overall trends in travel, and it says these are what our transportation needs are going to be in the future, be it better transit, increased roadway capacity, and so on. So that takes a big team, and that's one way that the TPO corresponds with others outside of our boundary. We'll take it back to funding because that is one of the most foundational components of an MPO. And there are really 5 or 6 programs that you should know. The first is the Metropolitan Planning Program. The Metropolitan Planning Program funds the staff that you saw mentioned on one of the previous slides. This funding source funds the day-to-day operations, and just like a lot of other federal transportation programs, it is an 80-20 program, meaning 80% of it is covered by the federal government, and the locality, City of Winston-Salem, provides the 20% local match. The next one is probably one of the more interesting ones, and that's the Regional Flexible Funding Program, which is our name for 4 different direct attributable funding sources that we get access to. The first is Surface Transportation Block Grant, which is kind of your catch-all. It basically funds any kind of transportation that you can think of. Transportation Alternatives Program, which emphasizes investments in trails, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and to some extent transit. The Carbon Reduction Program, which is authorized through FY26, focuses on investments that reduce carbon emissions, and the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program focuses on relieving congestion and improving air quality in our area. Mentioned earlier that we also get formula funding through the Federal Transit Administration through our 5303, 5307, 5310, and 5339 programs. Some of these are capital grants, and some of these are more operations. We also are involved with federal discretionary and competitive grants. So the RAISE grant that I mentioned earlier is one thing that the MPO can help localities like the city of Winston-Salem pursue and have in the past. Finally, we'll close with the prioritization and strategic transportation investments process. This is all of the federal funding that is allocated to the state of North Carolina, and all of the state funding that we raise through state taxes and other revenue sources. Prioritization is the process, again, for allocating billions of dollars in state and federal funding across the state, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on what that looks like in one of the next slides. But first, we'll talk about the Regional Flexible Funding Program. The Regional Flexible Funding Program is made up of those 4 direct attributable funding sources that I talked about earlier. And we typically hold a call once every 2 years. We're now moving to an annual structure, knowing that construction prices are changing and we want to make things more convenient for our local municipalities. But the long and short of it is that we receive approximately $11 million per year across those 4 funding sources that we can allocate towards projects. How we go about doing that is doing a call for projects. Typically, this will span 30 to 60 days. We'll contact the Technical Coordinating Committee and the Transportation Advisory Committee members on our board and say, submit your proposals, tell us what kind of funding you need for these projects. We then evaluate those projects as staff. But this isn't just staff saying their opinion on what the best project is. We create recommendations based on adopted criteria that the board vets thoroughly. So the board values things like congestion, safety, and other factors. And we evaluate projects based on those variables, produce a recommendation, establish a 5-year map of where those projects are going to land in terms of financial programming, program it in our local transportation improvement program and notify the state that we're doing the same through the state transportation improvement program, and then work over the course of several years to then implement those projects. We've made some pretty big changes to the Regional Flexible Funding Program in the recent past, and we're focused on project delivery. One of the things that we are now requiring of our member agencies is to build in contingencies. Because a lot has changed in the world of construction and construction prices have gone up, if you are submitting a project to the MPO that is just a line on a map and you haven't studied that project, you don't even have a great idea of how much property acquisition that project could involve, you're going to have to bake in a greater degree of contingency. So that's one recent reform that we've made. We also have a supplemental funding call. Because of cost increases, we have opened up calls for projects that specifically focus on projects that need supplemental funding because over the course of the last 5 years, they realized that construction is more expensive than what they previously asked for from the TPO. And finally, we do have project caps and incentives to make sure that municipalities are not taking on more projects than they can handle. All of our programs are 80% federal funding, meaning that the localities have to provide a 20% local match. But it's also important to note that these are reimbursement programs. So you do have to have 100% of the funding up front, and then you get reimbursed for that work as it goes, because the work needs to be done according to the federal regulations and standards. Next, we'll talk about strategic prioritization. This is required by STI law, or the Strategic Transportation Investments Law in the state of North Carolina. And it essentially answers the question, What are we going to do when we have seemingly unlimited transportation needs, but limited transportation dollars? We have only so much in our state coffers and our federal coffers that come down to the state. We need to have a data-driven and local input-based way of determining what projects should move forward. So here's how it works for us. The Winston-Salem area TPO gets a set number of submittals per mode of transportation at the start of every cycle, and every cycle starts every 2 years. This year, it'll happen to be 17 projects. We can submit 17 highway projects, 17 bicycle and pedestrian projects, 17 transit projects, and so on. The state then takes those recommendations that our TAC board adopts, evaluates those projects based on their contributions to congestion and safety and so on, turns out that score based on a set of quantitative data. And if it's a big project like the Northern Beltway, it qualifies for something called statewide mobility funds. And 100% of those projects are based on the quantitative score. But smaller, more localized projects, maybe you're thinking of a sidewalk project or a greenway project, they're based partly on the state's assessment of your project, but also based on local input. So one of the functions of our Transportation Advisory Committee is to assign local input points towards those projects to give them the best possible shot to be funded in the 10-year Transportation Improvement Program. And if transportation funding is available during that cycle of prioritization and you score high enough, your project is picked up for funding in that 10-year program. That's how North Carolina does it. That's the short version. We have a whole probably hour-plus long presentation for our TPO members on it, but we won't do that. You may be curious, what have the results of prioritization been in the past? Well, prioritization 6.0 was halted due to insufficient revenues following COVID and some hurricanes. But prioritization 7.0 did go on, and that was for the development of the 2026 to 2035 State Transportation Improvement Program, which our TPO is set to adopt here in the coming months. The results essentially showed this. We picked up several new projects in our area, but mostly funded for preliminary engineering only, meaning that they're not going to go on to right-of-way acquisition or construction in this 10-year time frame. The one that has been picked up for more than just preliminary engineering is a segment of the Northern Beltway from NC 67 to just north of Robin Hood and Meadowlark Drive. All the other projects that you see on this map, including the modernization of US 52 to interstate standards, the Jonestown Road interchange, Stratford Road interchange improvements, and other sections of the Beltway have been funded for preliminary engineering only. But all of these projects that are funded for PE only will be resubmitted in this cycle of prioritization and continue to compete to continue their project development into right-of-way and construction and so on. So I thought I would tie all of this together in our learning here today about the transportation planning process with an example of a recent success in the city of Winston-Salem. Salem Parkway multi-use path started as a plan. And when it started as a plan, it was then introduced into our comprehensive transportation plan, became a part of our fiscally constrained metropolitan transportation plan, and the city pursued funding for this project through multiple means. The first was the prioritization process that I mentioned earlier. It scored high enough that it got funding from the state for that. But then there were supplemental funding needs. And the TPO, through its regional flexible funding program, through the surface transportation block grant and so on, was able to provide additional funding to help make that project happen. Now, as you see that project progress along Salem Parkway, know that it started just as a line on the map, went through all of this process, went through in-depth studies in coordination with Creative Corridors Coalition and so on, eventually received federal funding through our TPO processes and is now being built today, with the eastern section currently under construction and our western section that will extend out to Atrium Wake Forest Baptist Hospital, hoping to begin in 2026. Thought I would also show the extent and reach of the TPO in this community specifically. There are 21 projects currently active within the city of Winston-Salem that are in part TPO funded. So just a couple of highlights here. Brewer Road Sidewalk Project, which will extend from Buchanan Street at the roundabout all the way down to Clemensville Road, is expected to begin preliminary engineering in the near future. The Meadowlark Drive Improvements Project was partially funded by the TPO, and that project has now reached completion. We have a few other projects like the Robin Hood Road Sidewalk Project soon approaching construction as well. Barbara Jane Project is making good progress and will begin the right-of-way phase by the end of this federal fiscal year. And we've got plenty of other projects and happy to answer questions on those later if you have any. Finally, I'll close with how you can get involved with the TPO. Some of you already are as primary members or alternate members of the TPO, but you can get involved with us. I will say one quick change to what you see here on the Winston-Salem area TPO website. It is now cityofws.org/3581-transportation-planning-organization. We're working on a short link that is cityofws.org/TPO because that our new name is the Transportation Planning Organization, but want to let you know that we do indeed have an active website, but if you follow that one, you won't get there. We also have a public comment center. So if you have constituents who are really engaged on transportation, tell them about our public comment center. It's survey-based. They fill out a couple of brief pieces of information, their zip code, their email, whatever they're comfortable sharing. They're able to comment on an item that's upcoming at our Transportation Advisory Committee board, or if they just want to talk about transportation generally, they can do that too. We also have our Transportation Advisory Committee and Technical Coordinating Committee meetings, agendas, and minutes published online at the link that you can see there on the screen. That link has not changed. And we certainly encourage you to attend, even if you are not a member. We have one coming up this Thursday, 2 p.m. for our Technical Coordinating Committee, and at 4:15 p.m. for our Transportation Advisory Committee on the 5th floor of the Bryce Stewart Building in the Arnold G. King Public Meeting Room. We also are now on Facebook, and you can get to our Facebook page by following the small bit.ly document. With that, thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Hunter. That was very informative, and you really enhanced our knowledge as it pertains to decision-making around transportation, funding, and planning. And at this time, I'll call on committee members to see if you have any questions or comments for Hunter. Okay, we'll start with Councilmember Clark, move on to
Our belt loop,
Councilmember Scipio after Councilmember Clark.
I know we're still working to complete the, I'm gonna say from about 3:30 to 6 o'clock on the clock down in the southeast, and maybe a little bit up north to connect to 52. Are there any other sections on the belt loop that will begin anytime soon? And you can walk if that map if you want to show us a pointer or something.
That's a good question. I'll do my best.
Okay.
So the section of the Beltway that is progressing right now down through Kernersville Road and eventually connecting to 74 is currently the most active.
And kind of show where that is.
So that will loop through here
Yeah,
and connect down to 70.
gotcha.
That is the most active project at this time. The next section that will continue for the western portion of the Beltway is this section from here to where that purple line begins.
And when do you
I don't know the
anticipate?
timeline for that off the top of my head, but we can get that.
It's basically over to an older road.
Yes.
And that's within the next year or so, 2 years
I don't think it's that soon.
No.
in my lifetime.
Take what you can get.
Not feeling too well today.
And we can get specific
But
information and report back later.
It is my understanding that the rest of it isn't funded yet. Is that correct?
That's right.
Meaning one of these, it's on the 20-year plan and the 10-year plan, but it's got to get on the, further down the list.
That's right. So yeah, these sections that you see from about Robinson Road area all the way down are funded for preliminary engineering only in the 2026 through 2035 transportation improvement program. And that's if funding conditions hold.
35, okay. Thank you.
So this is 10 plus years.
You did hold out.
Councilmember
Going to be a
Scipio.
push on that one.
You did hold out that one. Fine. That's nice.
This is just great information. I won't say it's clear as mud when you start dealing with all those acronyms. You have to figure out what does that all mean. But there is a lot of discussion on at the federal level and how funding is being considered to no longer exist. For the 11.5 million that we are receiving, is it safe right now that we will have it, or any other discussion?
That's a great question, and one that several of our Transportation Advisory Committee board members have raised as well. What we are finding right now is that the formula funding, which is the Surface Transportation Block Grant, Transportation Alternatives, CMAQ, and Carbon Reduction Program, is still safe at this time. And those funding sources are authorized through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act through FY26. What we are seeing, though, at the federal level is a higher level of scrutiny and review for discretionary and competitive grants. So grants like the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, now it's the BUILD grant, and some of our other competitive programs like Safe Streets for All, they are undergoing a review process, and our understanding is that slowly but surely some of those projects are getting approved. But to answer the question on our MPO funding source, the $11 million that you referenced per year, so far so good. That funding is available and it's formula funding.
Hunter, I would like to say I'm excited about the Northwest Boulevard Streetscape project. It will connect 3 wards, the East Ward, the North Ward, and the Northeast Ward, and enhancements are greatly needed in that area. My question is, when will it begin?
And when the study will begin?
Yes.
So the study is underway now, and I believe the first public input meeting is planned for the near future. I believe Kelly may have a more specific timeline in mind.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and members of the council.
Good afternoon.
The project has begun. We are in the data gathering phase, so we have a consultant that is gathering existing conditions, and we are planning to have a public meeting sometime in June. So we're still coordinating with all the council members and the location and all that. And so shortly, we will have certainly a date to publish.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Hunter. Are there any other questions or discussion? Okay, thank you, Hunter.
Thank you.
That concludes our agenda for Public Works, and so,
Finance will be at 4 o'clock.
okay. At this time, our meeting is adjourned.